Rob Rowe had worked with the 720 team, John Solowitz and Dave Rawson, those guys, to set up a skateboard half-pipe ramp in the back here.
Full scale.
One of the better ones I've ever seen.
10 foot of radius, I can build it.
Yeah, you working on it too?
10 foot of radius with like 2 to 3 feet of straight vertical at the top drop.
And they did that, and they had some of the best skateboarders in the area at the time.
We had not only the best skateboarders in the area, we had the best boarders in the world.
Yeah.
And we would
they'd be there playing around, we'd videotape them, and the purpose was, you know, kind of like Walt Disney filmed deers for Bambi. We had to film these skateboarders to understand skateboarding moves, and Will Nova was a fantastic animator, worked on that, and did a great job of capturing all of that. But we had a whole skateboarding ramp set up, and it became kind of like a party area, and it was really, that's right when I first started working here, and it was just incredible. You come to this place, you make video games, in the back there's a skateboarding ramp.
You can imagine a joystick that revolved on a circular basis that wouldn't return upright, so it just in a circle, which would enable you to do the 720. If you got your speed going right, hit a curve, you could flip in the air and do this, right?
Yeah.
To do the move.
Compared to now, we're working with bubble gum and rubber bands and hot glue. Essentially, the memory in the game was, I believe, 96K, which is just nothing. Now, I mean, we waste that on title screens nowadays. So the real challenge in designing games back then was, how do you do something interesting with some nice animation, and how do you do it in such a small package, because that doesn't allow us a lot of variety. There was a bug when we first were working on the flying and the running of the ostrich, and we had neglected to consider is when the ostrich lands on some of the floating cliffs, of how's that handled, when does the animation call the running leg and then the non-leg flap sequence. So there's a lot of situations where the ostrich is, the cliff is floating and the ostrich will be flying, but he's not high enough to show his legs, so it'll just do a belly flop across the cliff. And on the one side of the screen, we had two cliffs that were staggered. And when it does a belly flop, there's a little hole of a couple of pixels, and it allows the bird to squeeze out between the two cliffs. And we're racking our brains trying to fix it, but we were so embroiled in playing Cutthroat, where we would try to kill each other when we were playing and testing the game, and it became a really fun trick to do, is that someone would be hovering underneath these cliffs, and then you'd deliberately do the belly flop and squirt out and kill the guy underneath. And so we decided to keep that in there and call it a feature. One thing that was a real frustration for me was I like to pride myself in thinking of all the little details, and when Joust originally came out, there was a nasty pterodactyl bug where a player could stand on the middle edge and just hold his position, and the mouth of the pterodactyl would hit right into the lance, and you could play the game almost infinitum. I never could. I'm just too slow, I guess. But a lot of really good players, when we first sent the game out to manufacture, could do that, and that really ticked me off, because I had taken every character. I had a grid paper of how big all the characters were. I mapped out what the intelligence, the flight patterns of all the birds and the pterodactyls were, so that nothing like that would happen, where there'd be an infinite bug like that, where you could just keep playing the game forever and ever. Joust the movie is it's a little hobby I've been working on. I guess the transition is I started off as a toy designer, then I became a video game designer, and then I would like to become a movie designer. So I had always thought that Joust would make a great movie. The technology was never there for what I had in mind, but now it's more than there. Right now, the old video games are being gobbled up by collectors and in people's basements, but the prices are just starting to rise on some of them. You can still get a lot of old games pretty cheaply. I've been looking for an original Joust cocktail table, of which there's, even though Joust did really well, we only made about 500 cocktail tables, and it was really too bad because it was one of the originals. It was the only two-player simultaneous side-by-side cocktail game that was made, so it had a unique look, because at the time most all the other cocktail tables like Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man, one person sat on one side, the other sat on the other opposite, and then the screen flipped around. Well, this played just like the regular Joust, because you're both sitting next to each other, and the screen didn't flip. So I'd always regretted that I didn't get one for myself, so I finally found one and did some trades here and there, and I paid about $500 for it. But I would say they're probably worth more than that now.
The name that we wanted to use was Master Blaster, and we discovered at the time that there was a pinball simulation program called Billy Budge's Raster Blaster available for the Apple computer, so decided to change the name to avoid confusion. We pondered and toiled for a couple of weeks to come up with a better name for the game, and in frustration ended up just simply shortening it to Blaster.
Three. One is on display at my dad's house in Palo Alto. The other game, well, actually the second game, was converted into a Devastator game, which is a very limited edition prototype. And there have been unconfirmed sightings of the third game. Its actual whereabouts are unknown at this time. Durmold unfortunately had its tendency to shrink and was only used in two games, Blaster and Bubbles. Now normally this exhibited itself in a shrinkage that made the coin door hard to open. But actually in one game it was reported that the shrinkage increased the internal pressure of the cabinet so much that the monitor was ejected across the arcade and impaled a Donkey Kong Jr. machine. Fortunately, there were no other injuries. Well, the day after we cashed the check, Atari supernovaed, and Jack Tramiel fired 90% of the workforce in the great video game crash. Unfortunately, not a single remaining Atari employee knew of the existence of the Blaster project, and Blaster forever vanished into the rubble of the great video game debacle.
Doing a first-person flying game in 1983 without any scaling or rotating computer hardware is quite a challenge. Particularly it meant that each pixel of each image had to be hand-drawn in each size and in each rotation that it was displayed in the game. This caused thousands of hours of artist time to be necessary to generate all of the artwork that you see in the game. After initial testing, the ability to buy in and continue your game when it was over by inserting additional money was removed from the game. At the same time, the game was shortened from 30 stages to 20 stages to make it possible to complete it on one coin. At this time, there was a stage called Outer Space, which among other things had this gargantuanly large Starship Enterprise that would just fly over your head for about 3 miles. And that whole stage was removed at this time.
Even though it may take 2 minutes for your 266 megahertz Pentium 2 to boot up, Blaster was programmed, believe it or not, with a 1 megahertz chip. And man, did it hurt.
Joust 2 is the trivia question of all time, I guess, was that there actually was a sequel. We tried to resurrect Joust in 1985. Didn't make many games, but this is at a time when very few video games were selling, and there wasn't much of a video department anymore, and he had met with some of management. We were trying to figure out, well, gee, let's try another game, and so we were considering resurrecting and doing a sequel of either Robotron or Joust, and they decided to let's give Joust a crack at it.
Joust came out with a vertical monitor because it was during a time period when dedicated videos were having a great deal of difficulty. So Joust 2 is supposed to be a kit to retrofit various games out in the field. At that time, most of the games in the field were vertical monitors, like Pac-Man, Ms. Pac-Man, etc. It also seemed like the vertical screen would give the player more height so that they could fly and open up some new play possibilities. And for lack of any other reason, it seemed like a good idea at the time. The fun of the Pegasus is that you have to choose at what times to strategically become an ostrich and a Pegasus. The advantage is that an ostrich moves faster in the air but isn't as strong on the ground. Pegasus, being a much more stout beast, is when you're on the ground, if there's a tie, you're both on the same level, it wins. But if you're fighting in the air, it's sinking like a rock, so you're almost always higher than the Pegasus. So you need to decide which character you want to use and when. It's an easy question. My favorite artist is M.C. Escher, and Escher is famous for doing the drawings and sketches of three-dimensional objects forming out of two-dimensional space, and so that's why you see a lot of the buzzards falling out of the background and things of that nature. And just as a plus for me is we both share the same birthday.
KLAX was a game which management approached us, I don't know what, in late summer, and said we needed a product for the January show in England, and could we do a game in a few months? And so, of course I said yes, and then we had to go figure out what we were going to do in 4 months. And at that time, Tetris had been popular. Ed had done a coin-op version of Tetris, and Tetris had just taken off. So this KLAX was basically a following on the footsteps of trying to come up with a concept that played into this whole puzzle game thing that was happening at the time. I started drawing just on the paint system I had at work. I started drawing just little shapes of abstract pictures that looked like puzzle games, not without any kind of restrictions on what they should do or anything. And after, I don't know what, a week or two of this.
Right, he'd hang the ones that he liked, he'd print out and hang up on his wall. So we had all these things that looked like games, a lot of simple primary shapes and a lot of very colorful things, and that was the inspiration.
And then eventually one day, I don't know why, but I came up with, well, I'm thinking about these shapes coming down, and you have to sort them and put them in piles and match colors, very much like Tetris. And I don't know, it kind of came from an idea too of, remember that Lucy show where she has to make pies and they have to hurry up, and so you had to do these operations to get this thing finished. And so it was kind of like that. And I described it to Dave. I said, I picture, I don't know, I think we just picked 5 columns for some reason. I pictured 5 different columns of stuff coming down, and then you have a paddle and you collect it, and then you could move this paddle back and forth and plop it in the pile. And then when you had 3 or more of a kind, it would go away. And you could do verticals and diagonals and horizontal lines. And
That's the game.
That was the game. And Dave went home on the weekend, I think on the Amiga, right?
Right.
And over the weekend he did a real crude looking just blocks and colored things. And I remember went back, there was only one Amiga here at the time, was in the video lab, and he loaded up in the video lab, and
we were able to play it. I got a prototype going on a weekend in Amiga Basic, and we played it, and we refined it a bit. And then we had some 3D system that Mark used to generate the graphics of the tiles tumbling down, and so he generated a bunch of graphics, and then he went on vacation for about 3 weeks. And when he came back, I had got the game up and running on an escape hardware system, and people were lining up in the lab to play it. We were trying to minimize the hardware and have the least expensive hardware we could have. And the sound system at the time, we had an FM chip that did music, and we had a synthesizer chip that did digitized effects. And so we decided we could have just one of those chips to make an affordable system. So we went with the synthesizer chip. And so we could have all kinds of digital sound effects, but no music. People would work out patterns on paper, elaborate chain reactions and sub-chain reactions, and then they would patiently play the game and arrange all the tiles in that pattern and make it happen. Mark wanted a golf type sound, you know, like the little flight clapping and the sound of a golf crowd in there. So we kind of went around the halls and we got everybody we could, and we put them into the sound lab.
Yeah.
And
we had everybody clap like real quietly like golf, and then everybody go, oh. And you can hear, you know, and basically those were the sounds.
That's it.
And then I did the scream, that that scream, and then there was, I mean, everything was very simple and quick, and you know, there was not really, it was really.
We didn't pay for a lot of expensive voice talent.
KLAX.
Click, clack, click, clack, click, clack was the original idea for the sound of the tiles coming down, so we just shortened it from that.
It was funny, when the game went to Japan, they were concerned at the time because the drug thing was just happening, and something called crack had just come out. And they were real confused when we sent them this game called KLAX, because they were concerned that it was crack that we were saying. So that little interesting anecdote there, and marketing problem they had. And so we had to make sure we definitely said, you know, winners don't do drugs or something in there for the Japanese market. It was.
Is this the same people that brought us Pokemon?
Yes, Pokemon. There's cracks.
The most amazing project was the Defender project, because we were the #2 pinball company at the time, and we were yeah, we're going to get in the video game business. Yeah, right, Williams. And we got a bunch of people. They were put in a separate facility over on Belden Avenue, And this group, you know, everybody had one goal, and that was in a pretty short time frame to do whatever it took to make a really hot video game. And just the way things were accomplished by that group and the atmosphere among this group was just amazing. I've never seen it equaled. And you know, now I've got a management role, and I would love to take and bottle whatever the ingredients were to try and create a situation like that again. And it was just, it's the best situation I've ever seen or been in.
Management came down. This was about 3 months before the show, before we had to finish this game, and management came down and goes, "Man, this game is a pile of I mean, this game is so stupid. I mean, what are these people on here? I mean, where are you going?" You know, it was like, you know, they were saying, "Okay, you got to get rid of these stupid astronauts out of there, you know, and get some game going here, you know, because you are really blowing it." It's pretty crazy because the night, this was insane actually. At the time, for our development system, we used this thing called a Motorola Exerciser, which was this huge, probably the most bloated, overpriced computer ever created. It was a dual floppy disk system. They used 8-inch floppy disks, which are like, you know, enormous, held like, you know, 10 bytes on them. And you had this $20,000 box that, I mean, would only work for like 3 or 4 days at a time before something failed. You know, it was horrendous. So it got to the point late in the project where it was taking like half an hour to just assemble the program. And so it was, and the odds of actually getting an assembly that actually made it were so low that the last week of the project, we just essentially just object code patches. We left the computer on, the program was in memory. Thank goodness there never was a power failure. And we just made patches in the code and just kind of stuffed them in there for the different bugs. And then it was like 4 a.m. and it was like, okay, we got to burn the ROMs for the show. And we like burned them. We like took everything was stuck in this computer memory, so we had to like pull out the bytes essentially, and then burn them into EEPROMs. And we did it, and like it was at 6 a.m. Plugged them in, it didn't work. And I was like, oh, you know, it's like, what happened? You know, did we bend a pin? Did we, you know, of these, you know, 12 ROMs, you know, what was screwed up? And we burned them again or something, and they were like all blank or something. I don't know what it was, but finally we burned them again, and we got the damn thing working. And we like took these chips to the show. The cabinets were sitting on the show floor, like awaiting this program. You know, so we got to the show at like 7 a.m. and, you know, plugged in the chips, and the thing came on, and it was just like, we just go, oh my God, it worked. You know, we were just, you know, couldn't believe it. It was like we were just so high from like not sleeping, and, you know, it was just this ultimate high to like just this thing actually worked. The show was the the Amusement and Music Operators Association, the AMOA, which is the big coin-op, quarter-eating game show, and in the United States, and mostly attended by game room operators and arcade chain executives and various other industry hacks. And the thing is, the tragic thing is, none of these people actually play video games, you know, and we had to figure out there nobody would play it. I mean, they were afraid. They were so afraid of this game that I had to like spend my time trying to lure people into our booth to like play the game, and they'd want to watch me play the game, or, you know, sometimes we'd have a couple of kids in there playing the game, but mostly the game was empty because everybody was so afraid of the game. I guess it was all the buttons. You know, we just had so many buttons on there that, you know, people just go, man, I just can't deal with this. So it's kind of like, well, we go, oh, okay, it's kind of cool, you know, maybe we'll sell 1,000 games or something, you know, maybe some suckers will buy them. But you know, at the time, it seemed like it was a bomb. But I don't know, we were just so high from finishing the thing that it wasn't disappointing at all. In fact, I don't know, we kind of maybe were proud that it intimidated everyone. You know, it's like we're kind of proud that the game like freaked people out. You know? So it was kind of, you know, people kind of, I thought it was kind of a bomb, you know, the buzz on the show was like Pac-Man and Defender were like bombs. Pac-Man because it just played forever and it wasn't exciting, and Defender was like way too complicated to play. And people were thinking this game Rally X, which was a little car racing game, was like the big game of the show. We stuck it out in an arcade, and the first night, I didn't even show up. You know, I mean, you stick this thing out. You've been working on this thing for months. You almost got fired. You know, I mean, there was a point where I cleaned out my desk. You know, in like the dark days when I was working on the astronauts, I'd actually cleaned out my desk and had put all my stuff in boxes. I mean, I was that close to like just quitting, and so I just didn't want to, you know, I didn't want to find out what people really wanted, like, so I didn't show up first night. And second night, I go out to the arcade, and the place was just, there was like people 10 deep watching Defender. There was people sitting on chairs and couches and like camped out around this game. And at that point, I figured, wow, maybe this is kind of cool. That was VidKids. That was, we started in February of '81, and then Stargate was our first game.
And that, what else did you guys do besides Stargate?
We did Stargate, Robotron, and then a game called Blaster, which is falls into that low production category. And we also actually developed an Atari 800 version of that game, which preceded the coin-op, and was never brought to market. Well, Eugene and I did, we shared the load. It was, we had a lot to do in a pretty short period. In the sense of doing a sequel, we were in a world where there were a couple of sequel games at the time. They had done Asteroids Deluxe behind Asteroids, and they took everything that was fun out of the game. And they had done Deluxe Space Invaders behind Space Invaders, which was essentially the same game. And we wanted something that would give some good new appeal to the game, but that wouldn't be playable by the good players to the extent where they were playing 10, 15, 20 minutes on Defender. If they walk up to Stargate and are playing 20 minutes a game, this game's not going to have any ability to make money. So we worked really hard to come up with a mechanism to make the game good for the better player without having him stay there for long periods of time. Contrary to what a lot of people would believe, a game that you walk up to and you play 20 minutes immediately, you're not gonna be very interested in. You know, you need the new conquest. You need to go up there and have it going. You're dog food. And for you to want to come back and try and learn and beat it. So in Stargate, we put the warp feature in, which was a matter of rescuing and holding on to 4 humanoids and flying through the Stargate, which is a pretty high-level accomplishment. But if you're a good Defender player, it's you can do it in your sleep. And what that did was that gave you a huge bonus. Took you ahead 2 or 3 waves in the game, and giving you the bonus gave you a couple extra ships. So it was a way to get the good players to jump into where the action was frenzied and make them think that they were having a one-up on the game. And it worked pretty well. When I first got the Digital Eclipse program, my mind was blown. My first encounter was actually Paul Dassault called me over to the front of our building. And there's 2 guys there with a Macintosh, and Paul goes, "I want to show you something." And, he plays with his Macintosh and types something. All of a sudden, the carpet sweeps of the memory test, which is pretty much a signature of the old Williams games, is appearing on the Mac. And I'm like, oh my God, you guys wrote a simulator. If someone had told me in 1982 that in 1995 I'd be sitting on my computer playing on a machine that's simulating the program, my exact work, I mean, I would have thought, I would have wondered what the guy was smoking.
games themselves, when they were done, were such a struggle against what could technically be done with affordable horsepower. The fact that this could happen is just, you know, represents amazing growth in the speed and size of these computers.
My contribution was this. I did 100% of the software. Brian and Sharon came up with the original idea of Rampage as far as it's like, what can we do as far as scrolling a background, using background animation as abilities. They came up with the original idea, and then we got together on stuff, and we went from a 2-player monster breaking up the world to 3. It was, a lot of it was to do with, we were going to make you the biggest, baddest character on the screen and have all the good guys being the little people that you were destroying. It was a game of letting you do the destruction. And you be the bad guy for a change. Be the bad guy and have fun at it.
Rampage was fun. Rampage was one of these things that broke a lot of ground in a lot of different ways. We managed to squeeze an extra player on the cabinet, and that let the game at the time earn the distinction of being the highest earning game ever. So they wanted to do, once it took off, they wanted, you know, a lot of the trade magazines wanted to do covers and stuff like that. So we actually built, we mocked up a scene wherein got a dollhouse and busted a wall out of it and put some furniture in there, and I made a little styrofoam head, and this was pushing through the wall, so it was the cover of a magazine. With this, because the rub with Rampage was you're destroying all these cities. There's 768 levels in the original game, and like 125 different cities. We actually, unbeknownst to management at the time, we sent out press releases to all the cities all over the world, telling them that their town was about to be destroyed by 3 giant creatures. And amazingly, over 50 papers around the world picked up on it. And I mean, front page articles telling them that, you know, you too can destroy Peoria for 25 cents. This was, the peripheral stuff is as much fun, for me anyway. The stuff like this makes the industry fun, makes it fresh, makes every game fresh. The names for the characters were more just, you know, because they sounded funny. There was nothing about Lizzie, obviously, is a lizard, but and George sounded like what a big ape would sound like, and Ralph was almost an onomatopoeia. Is that right? Is it onomatopoeia? Anyway, George is almost an onomatopoeia for, you know, a dog or a wolf growling. So the names just sprung up in conversation. They seemed natural. You've got a certain amount of time to do a game. We've got to be done with this in so long. There's a million things you always want to do, and you come to the point where you've only got so much time left, so the feedback becomes real important. If people see that, yeah, I can punch this subway train and it goes back the other way, somebody stumbles onto the fact that, well, if you let me punch it again instead of destroying it, we've got a game within a game here. So it's accidental. Based on feedback, you enhance it. Instead of making it 2 hits to destroy it, well, let's make it 10 so they can knock it back and forth. Once the monsters shrunk, obviously they weren't wearing clothes when they were monsters. They'd have to be nude down there. So I did a little nude picture of men and women covering their private parts, such as they were. And actually we had a fair amount of backlash over that. Here we've got something with that, you know, her hips are only 3 pixels wide. So I defy you to point anything out if you could find it, but we actually got some, you can't do that. These people, once they found out they were nude, there was a backlash. But it was more just, you know, talk. It didn't hurt us in any way. John and Dave started working on Ramparts.
after we did KLAX, right?
Right.
Yeah, and so they were messing around with Tetris puzzle pieces, and in their typical style, they came up with a totally unique approach to this game, and something that definitely only they could come up with. I mean, the concept of taking these puzzle pieces and building a wall, and then having another stage where you go into this battle mode. I mean, it's so abstract and strange, but anyway, they got the game up and running in a very easy play, a fundamental state, and then Pete Lipson, who was another developer at the time, programmer, worked with Mike a lot, and I, at lunchtime, started playing Rampart every day at lunch.
Religiously.
And because you're building walls, we became known as the Wall Boys. And we were the first people, clearly, to play Ramparts, and I think a lot of our enthusiasm helped fuel them along, and we fed back to them on what was needed. But it was an amazingly, we all used to laugh with them about how bizarre the game design was. I mean, the whole, puzzle piece, building walls, cannons, fighting stage, and it's a very unique game, very interesting game to me, how it works out. And a lot of fun with the trackballs, and so we were with them during that whole time. It was a blast.
Correct me if I'm wrong, didn't Jerry Lychek here basically invent the trackball?
I think he was responsible for that, yeah.
Jerry, yeah.
A mechanical industrial engineer who was employed here for years and years and years. He's the guy, the brains behind the original trackball. I think he came up with the idea of using a cue ball as the mechanism.
Oh, the first one, it was much larger than the cue ball.
Was it?
And we even designed one, I think it's still hanging around, with a bowling ball.
The inspiration for Splat had a lot to do with John Belushi's big scene in Animal House. It was a good time, it was a lot of fun, and I thought just a food fight would make a really good game.
Well, originally it was going to be the James Bond theme because Bill Adams, who was running the software group at the time, and I were both huge James Bond fans. And we had gone to Japan, and I'd picked up a tape of James Bond's greatest hits. And the very first time we brought the game up, I mean, it was really, the entire game was very, very James Bond inspired. But the game played with the James Bond theme for many months until we couldn't get the rights, at which point one of the marketing guys suggested Peter Gunn, which was something we weren't terribly familiar with, but it did the trick. The car was a 1983 Z28, which I had just gotten, and I'm a huge car nut, so I actually wanted to do lots of different cars, and one of the problems was that we really had tremendous limitations. I mean, 32 by 32 pixel picture blocks, 2 of them stacked to draw the car. Couldn't get a lot of, you really couldn't get a lot of anything that looked like any real car. Originally I wanted it to be something even flashier, and we couldn't get it in. So the red, my car was red, the red didn't look great either. So we ended up with a white car that showed up really well, had some red and blue stripes on it. You have to remember that it was a time when the company was doing tremendously well with Japanese game licenses. We're making 1,200 Pac-Man a day, and that's not an exaggeration, So it was a time when, an internal development group made up of guys that just really wanted to make games. We were just kind of, they put us in a warehouse off-site kind of forgot about us. And you know, basically there was the pressure was we wanted to make really cool games, but they had plenty of product to put on an assembly line. It's a little different than today, where we actually, you know, we need, when a game designer has a product in development, that product is expected to make it to market. So the pressure was a little different. When we start doing a game, we typically throw in the kitchen sink before reality intrudes. And so this game had everything that you've ever seen in a spy movie. And the transformation to the boat, and then was supposed to be followed by a transformation to a flying device, something like the helicopter. So you could go head to head with the enemy helicopter that is such a bastard in the game.
The controls were totally one of a kind at the time, and they've hardly been used ever since. You know, Eugene really, you know, wanted to give you that monster control, and part of the, you know, one of the really adrenaline rushes in the game as a result of the amount of power you have. You've got so much power and control that the game can put you in really tough situations you can actually fight your way out of, and that's one thing that keeps people coming back to it over and over.
I think they will soon realize that humans are nasty little things. You know, they're trying to blow up things. They got car bombers. They got nuclear terrorists. You know, all these mass murderers. You know, all these nasty little habits that humans have. You know, create wars, threaten to blow up the world. You know, endangering the entire planet. I mean, it's clear that humans are psychos, and for their own protection, you know, we'll have to be confined in safe zones.
There were some games in that period that were producing either low numbers or not at all that most of the audience probably hasn't had a chance to see. Some low production games were Mystic Marathon, Turkey Shoot, Inferno. Those three were tested, and there were some number built of each of those models, and they can be found in collectors' hands, but the quantities are limited. Then there were games like Play Ball, Speedball. There's at least one other that were fully developed and tested, but were never put into production, and there are no games in collectors' hands. I have the only existing Play Ball sitting in my office.
What happens is the brains, their algorithm, which was supposed to be seeking out the closest human and then go and reprogram them. That was supposedly their algorithm. Something got screwed up, which actually I never really looked into it. Didn't really want to know because it was working good. But they all turn out they initially will seek the first human, which in the case of the first brainwave is Mikey. There's one Mikey and there's all these other mommies. And so they're all going for Mikey. If you can keep Mikey alive, don't pick him up, and don't allow the brains to kill him. If you can keep him alive, then the brains will continually try to seek him, and they won't program any of the other mommies. And so in that situation, you can basically kill all the brains, but you have to leave one left so that the wave doesn't end. And this is the horrible thing, is that so often you'll like kill the last one, or it'll be a grunt will be left or something, and then it'll run into like an electrode, you know, before you picked up this treasure trove of points, which is all your humans are just waiting out there, and you wait for one turn. You want to pick them all up in one turn so you can turn them all into 5,000s. But if you somehow blow it, then you get nothing.
We also had a sequence where you can, you know, play with the controls, and out comes a copyright message with Eugene's and my name on it. It's in both Stargate and Robotron. The Robotron sequence I know off the top of my head. The Stargate one I have written down.
What's the Robotron?
The Robotron one, okay, it's three. Each of the sequences are three combinations of buttons being pressed, and you have to do combination one, and then within a quarter of a second, when you let go of combination 1, you have to be on combination 2 within a quarter of a second. Then when you let go of combination 2, you have to be on combination 3 within a quarter of a second, and you have to do all this without dying in gameplay. It's not difficult on a Robotron. It's much harder on the digital Eclipse version, but I have done it. It doesn't matter how long you sit on each combination, but when you let go of the combination, you have a quarter of a second to be on the next one. Combination 1 is move right, fire up, and press the player 1 start button. Combination 2 is move up, fire down, and press the player 2 start button. That is the 2-player start. And then combination 3 is move down, fire up, and you hold the fire up, and it'll hold the message on. When you let go of the fire up, the message goes.
I've got a Robotron down in my basement, and it's like every now and then I just have to go down and kick its butt. It's just, I've got to, you know, just kick its ass. And unfortunately, if I haven't played in a while, I'll get down there, and it'll just humiliate me. Now, every Robotron player that's really into it these days plays it at 10. You have to play it at total maximum difficulty. Otherwise, you can just play it forever and it's not interesting. But at 10, it is a real nasty, mean game. And it takes you maybe an hour or two just to get warmed up. You know, the game will just kick your ass and humiliate you, and you'll get 80,000 or 100,000 or 150,000. And you're just crying out. And you just like want to kill it. You're grabbing the game by the joysticks and you're just shaking it and slamming it on the wall. And eventually you get to the point, it's almost like warming up for a basketball game or something. You get to the point, you're sweaty, and you've got this kind of attitude. You cannot win until you have this attitude, this total mindset of just total concentration and total rage. You've got to be pissed off. When you're on, it's just such a thing of beauty, you know. You'll get on a roll, and you'll just like be cleaning off wave after wave after wave of them, and you're just like, ah, yeah. But inevitably, you like start getting lazy, and you'll start getting too cocky, and then before you know it, you'll just like lose 4 or 5 guys in a row, and you're in some horrible situation, and the quarks are just like keep multiplying and keep putting out tanks, so the spheroids just keep putting out forces, and you kill out a few, and they keep putting out more, and then again you have to buckle down and you know, get back to it and somehow conjure up that rage from within you, you know, to keep going, you know, and it's kind of the cycle of conquest, and then of getting your butt kicked, and then of going back and keep coming back, and if you can stand this for like a few hours, you can reach 1,000,000 points. And I understand now that's kind of my personal ambition. I mean, there's players that do 5 or 10 million. Unfortunately. But my personal thing is like to do 1,000,000, and I don't think I've quite achieved that even yet to this day. I've had like a 900,000, I've had several 900,000 games, and somehow at 940,000 I'll just get weak in the knees, and I won't have it, you know, and I just like, I'm watching helplessly, you know. I've just, you know, maybe I had a run of 100,000 points on a previous guy, but for some reason I'm just sitting here and I'm helpless and I'm crumpled, but I'm just like a sweaty, limp dish rag, and it's something I can't get over that 1,000,000-point barrier. But that's still my personal ambition. I know someday I'm going to kick that game. You know, I'm going to kick its butt. I'm going to beat it, and you know, until then, the basement appointments will continue.
The reason why we made it a 3-player game was simply we had 4 characters in the game, 4 cars, 4 drones, so to speak. If one player played the game by himself, obviously that was a shoot-in. You could have 3 computer-controlled cars, and that's how you could control the pace of the race through those drones, as we call them. 2 players was fine, even 3 players was fine. You always had that 4th player or 4th character to control the pace of the game. But we had a dilemma. And we were in a game design meeting with the management. If 4 players were playing the game, how in the world were we going to pace the game? We had no computer drone at that point. Cause
we had you didn't have a clock running down.
We had no clock, and so then we had, yeah, sorry.
And the other thing was trying to come up with a cabinet where you had the ability to, the key with sprints were the fact that you'd learn the angle of the approach and the speed of your car, and you'd throw the wheel so that you'd slide around. And that was what Sprint was all about. So trying to get 4 players with enough room with the steering wheel so they could all view one monitor was...
Then they'd all be like spinning wheels, smacking each other.
Which was really tough. So it was like, okay, 3 players is really good still. It's way more than 1.
The real reason, yeah, though, when it finally was decided to be a 3-player game was simply because we had no way of knowing from a game design standpoint how to pace a 4-player game because there wasn't a clock in the game. And so magically we just said, oh, don't make it a 4-player game, make it a 3-player game. We have the 4th drone. So use our clock.
Why didn't you put a clock in?
Well, we talked about it, and we didn't want to. That would change the whole game design. We wanted the coin drop to be governed by pure competitiveness, racing against other players. If you win the race, you continue on without paying. If you lose the race, you pay. And so that was, it just followed on the coattails of the success of Gauntlet, being multiplayer. A lot of discussion given to coin drop and how we can maximize that in the game. I can think back to my Super Sprint development system, and it was multi-layers of boards, wires running everywhere. It only worked if I had a coffee cup, a styrofoam coffee cup that I'd wedged in between the first 2 boards, because if they were any closer, too much heat was being generated.
Dave Weavenson Memorial Coffee Cup.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly, it was a technician on the project, Dave Weavenson. He made it all happen. There were other technicians as well, but the development systems back then weren't as elegant as they are now. They were homemade. In Super Sprint, we tried to add a little bit of perspective to the tracks over and above what had been done previously on the top-down views, and that is some of the turns on the tracks were banked. We tried to represent that graphically, and we also represented that algorithmically in the driving algorithms, where if you went over a banked curved portion of the track, you had more traction as much more than you did on the straightaway. So we tried to give it a little bit of a 3D feel, but it was purely 2D. And it was, I guess, a couple of years there, it was the last of the 2D type. There was nothing realistic about the driving algorithm in Super Sprint, but that's what made it fun and challenging is the older game, Sprint from the late 70s, used elements of the free spinning wheel as opposed to one that locks. And we wanted to even enhance that further, so we changed the driving algorithm. It's drastically different than the original to emphasize the fact that you can spin the wheel. And that became the art of the game, learning how to, as I think Mike mentioned it earlier, learning how to spin that wheel right when you're coming into a turn and then catch the wheel as you're coming out of the turn as a way to play the game.
That's a lot of the fun of the game.
That was the fun of the game.
That was the most interactive aspect of that game, just sitting there and just really spin
learn how
around
to spin that wheel,
slamming down the gas pedal.
Grab those wrenches.
And let me make one other comment about Gauntlet, and that was we saw the benefit of maximizing coin drop by building up your character. And so well into the project, we had decided to assign different attributes to the cars, being more traction, more acceleration, higher top speed. We took all of those attributes and made them a feature in the game. And that wasn't an original part of the design to do that. We didn't have in our original document to build up your car over time. And so we introduced that into the game during the development. And that was a big part of the gameplay, the fact that in the arcades, kids could begin to play the game and begin to lose and start adding money, but over time, after they put in $2 or $3, they start to enhance the features of their car, which made them want to stay on the game even further, because they didn't want to walk away from their car, because there were 5 levels of each of these car features, 5 levels of acceleration, 5 levels of traction, 5 levels of higher top speed. And so people wanted to stay on the game so they wouldn't lose their car.
That'd be Budweiser, and the way that came about was Scott and I came up with an idea for a bar game, and we were intrigued by the idea of sliding beers and empty mugs down a bar, and what kind of action you could get with a bartender, and some angry customers or some happy customers. And we did some initial design work on that, and we went to Bally Midway, and there was a fellow at Bally Midway who was very good at getting licenses. I think his name was Tom Neiman. And he went out and talked to Budweiser in St. Louis, got them excited, and we all went down and talked to them some more, and Budweiser was on board.
Bally Midway at the time had really good cabinet people, so we suggested a cabinet that looked like a bar. They put a brass rail at the bottom of the cabinet where you could rest your foot while you were sitting on a stool playing the game. They put metal cup holders on the control panel where you could rest your drink, preferably a Budweiser. And the Budweiser tappers looked like, or the tappers to pour beer actually looked like Budweiser tappers. For the root beer version, they changed the cabinet just slightly, where they put some extra stickers on the cabinet to say root beer, and that they changed the Budweiser logos to root beer logos.
Well, we tested Tapper first in the Snuggery, and that was a new kind of testing for us. We'd previously only tested in arcades, and so I think Scott and I really enjoyed an opportunity to go test this in the evenings at the Snuggery, and it was exciting for us to watch players who were having a good time in the bar kind of wander over and get excited about a beer drinking game, a Budweiser game, and we enjoyed watching them, and we learned a lot from those initial tests. We knew we had a winner when we watched people play.
I've always had sort of an eclectic taste in music. In college I got into a lot of alternative stuff. I was a big fan of Devo and Talking Heads, the Ramones. I used to listen to that a lot in my office while I was designing the characters. I had a lot of fun putting safety pins through their heads and mohawks on the characters. And most of the other designers on the project didn't really care for that kind of stuff, so I tried to keep it to myself as much as possible. But it was kind of fun to bring the music scene of the time and put it into the video game. It kind of dates the whole piece.
Well, we worked on several together. The first one was Domino Man. I had a minor role in that, but I think Rich and Elaine Ditton were really the drivers on that one. And then after that I worked on a game called Wacko with Scott. We were matching aliens and mismatching aliens, and it was really a lot of fun. You get some interesting combinations. I still look back and I like that game very, very much. And then we came up with an interesting idea of a two-player competitive game, which was one of the first. There were a few that preceded it, but you were a logger and you were playing against another logger trying to knock trees on each other. And we had a log rolling round in there, and we really had a lot of fun with that one. It was almost in the same vein as Tapper, but a little bit different play mechanics. So we worked on some interesting stuff.
Back in those days, creators of games were really not allowed to put their names or credits into the game, so we kind of snuck it in as an Easter egg. We really weren't supposed to, but we did anyways. During the attract scene, while the word tapper is filling up with liquid, either beer or root beer, if you're holding all the controls down and press the player 1 start and player 2 start at the same time, our credits will come up on the screen. We're designing all the characters for the game. We had a lot of fun animations, and after they would drink the beers, some of them would burp. We thought, wouldn't that be a kick to have a burp sound in the game? So we contacted Texas Instruments to see if they had any kind of speech chips that we could do to use for the game.
They had a speech specialist at the time who brought us over to their office, supplied us with a 6-pack of beer. We all sat around a microphone drinking beer and belching into it, and we ended up with a pretty neat chip full of our belches. We put it in the game, and after almost every beer they would belch, and it was very, very funny, but it got pretty obnoxious, and we all decided that Budweiser probably wouldn't be too thrilled with the idea, so we scrapped it.
That quality that I saw back then, it still stands out. A lot of times these days with a lot of the games, the newer games that we see come out in the arcades, they're interesting, but they're either they're beautiful games to look at, but the gameplay is real lousy. It's not an enjoyable experience. Or they've got some interesting gameplay things going there, but they don't pay attention to graphically what really makes a game look good and can help bring the player into the experience more. You don't see a whole lot of attention being paid to all of the parts of a good game all at the same time, as they used to in the old days when the discipline seemed to have been different. And so it's really easy for me to believe that there's this, you know, classic bring the old stuff back again kind of sentiment out there. The thing that's unfortunate about it is that the fellow who was in charge of that decision-making process, Noah Falstein, decided he was nervous that we'd get in a lot of trouble, too much trouble, for putting an Easter egg in. So he buried the thing so deep down that I can't even remember this complex series of things that you have to do to get it to show up. Guaranteed no one ever find it. The bug was a real cool one. When you play the game, as the Sinistar kills you and starts to kill you, you don't die right away. You sort of like circle over the Sinistar's mouth, and then he chomps you, and then you're destroyed. It turns out that while you're in that configuration where you're spinning around in the mouth but not quite dead yet, one of the warrior guys can come in and shoot you right then and kill you right then. And then the Sinistar kills you and you die twice, which it's really rare. It's extremely rare that it would happen, because most of the time the warriors, I believe in fact the warriors will not kill you when the Sinistar has you in its death grip already. But if one of their previous shots is still floating around in space, as they sometimes do, one of those can kill you. I think that's the way it worked. And the really interesting, that was a bug, and that was a drag, because of course every once in a while consumers would lose 2 lives instead of just 1, which they really hated. The kids, those kids, found out that if you only had 1 life left, and you got into that death grip where it was about to destroy you, and then the warrior shot came and killed you, the warrior shot would reduce your lives to 0, and then the Sinistar would kill you, which would reduce your number of lives left to -1. And in the computer world, -1 is also a really big number. And all of a sudden, you'd have 255 lives left. And Lord knows how the kids would find these things, but I knew kids that could show me this in an arcade. They go up and say, look at this, and all of a sudden they have 255 lives, and man, you can play for a long time on Sinistar. You've got 255 ships left, boy.
I think the big inspiration for Tube and for me when I was first thinking of the idea is it was kind of a reaction to the fighting genre of games that was going on at the time. And I saw an enormous amount of violent activity in video games at the time, and I swore to myself there must be a way to create a game that's fun to play and can earn a lot of money, but can be good, clean fun for kids to play. Well, I think it was a fun game, and a lot of people enjoyed it, but it still didn't have the appeal that the violent games had. It's just amazing. It's very difficult to come up with a concept that you would think that people would have fun playing in a sort of a strategic way, a kind of in a challenging way in terms of the control, to challenge yourself as a designer, to come up with innovative new environments and approaches, and still the kids are drawn toward these violent tendencies. Later on, I went to do Primal Rage, which was a big hit because it had a lot of blood in it. So you know, it's a reaction to kind of these violent games, and I thought that there was a way that we could make a game that would be good, clean fun for kids, and I think that Tubin was definitely a cult hit. There was a good, you know, strong, you know, following of the players that would always play it and loved it and would play it all the way through. But it didn't have the broad base appeal that some of the other games did. We built a tile editor, and we had pieces of river, rapids, of shoreline, and the designer would sit and click through tiles one at a time and basically lay them down right in the system and build himself a level and connect all the pieces, kind of like magic squares, and you put it all together, and all of a sudden you have a level. And then you could go and you could add objects on top of that. You could add snakes or alligators or hippos and cans, and you could just pop those in the playfield at different spots and try the level on almost immediately. If you go through and you destroy each individual piece of brush or thorns that are out there in the water, eventually what will pop up is one of the letters of Tubin will come out and it will float around. You can go and collect it, and so at the end of the game, you try to spell out Tubin in letters, sort of as it's kind of a game on top of a game. It's not necessary to do that, but it's.
What was the reward for that? Is there any?
Well, no, yeah, it came out and spelled it out for you, and you got a lot of money, you got a lot of points. If you go slow on Tubin, the gator would come out, and he was called the gator for a reason. It's because he was put in there to keep pushing you ahead. It was this, again, Tubin was a waiting game. And we found that what players would do is they would just sit there and wait for just the right period of time, and then really try to get through the gate or to go past an obstacle. And in order to kind of prod them a little bit, we put the gator out there, and if you don't go through the gates, he'll come out and bite you, and sort of prod you along and get you going. So the trick of Tubin is to take a nice pace and always go through the gates, and he will never bother you ever. One of the novel things about Tubin is we did have a pretty decent current map, and depending on the animation of the water would actually pull you down at different rates depending upon the graphic that we were displaying underneath the character at the time too. And I think that kind of thing had been done previously, especially now with water at least. But there's always been this aspect that you have a game and you have a player and you have a play field and you have obstacles or enemies in the play field, but the play field itself doesn't really interact with you. It sort of sits there. And this was kind of a new approach to have the actual playfield as part of the game as well, to get the actual background doing something to the player. It was the incredible J11 chip, which was a deck-based processor, PDP-11 family chip, right? You had that chip, didn't you? And we programmed in a language called Bliss, which was anything but, and it was quite a beast.
I guess the really interesting thing in Robotron and Smash TV is you are confined to a single screen, and really in Robotron it was the easy thing to do with the technology at the time, and it turned out kind of interesting. In Smash TV, we actually chose that, the dynamic there, because the cool thing of that dynamic is it's a confinement. It's a sense of being trapped and surrounded with no escape, and that was kind of the cool thing in Smash TV is you're sitting there,
seeing your whole world.
You see everything out there that you have to kill, and then they're just converging on you from all sides. And you just have this feeling of entrapment and this collapse upon you, and you have to somehow flee you know, work with the flow, somehow just blast your way through this mass and get out. And that dynamic, you know, is really a lot of fun. And once if you opened it up and allowed the game to scroll in any direction, if you allowed, you know, a bigger play field, then it becomes, you kind of lose that dynamic because you can always just keep running. And here you must stand and fight, and it's the coolest thing is you think you're dead. I mean, there's so many times when you almost, you can take your hands off the controls. You go, oh man, I'm dead, and like you're not dead. You go, whoa, and it's like you keep killing, you know, keep fighting away, and like you somehow come out of it, and you go, man, I
can't believe I survived.
How to survive, you know, just
yeah, that's the key to all these the successful games is that you know, tight situations that you somehow escape from. Back in those days, you know, if you'd finish a game, like the Atari VCS games, if you finished the game, well, you know, you'd stop playing it. So, you know, I think it's important to always put in some dramatic finale that's very difficult to attain. And so, you know, when we put the keys out there, and unfortunately what would happen is people got so good at the game, they'd go through and they'd clear out the waves more quickly than we had anticipated. So the random icons that come out, and one of them is a random key, the key would come out, it wouldn't come out as often because they were so good at the game. So they would get all the way through the game, not have enough keys to get into the pleasure domes, have to go back and do it again.
If you look at the Robotron and the Smash TV style of games, if you look at the amount of enemies that you deal with on a per second basis, how many kills per second, I don't think it's ever been exceeded or even come close to by any other game.
Right.
The amount of
carnage.
Action, amount of
amount
pure
of
carnage
yeah.
and action that you have to deal with, and it's amazing how you really have to have this mindset of, you kind of have this global strategy of, you know, don't get too near the wall, don't get trapped in the corner.
Right.
But then you always have to have this free, you have to be always kind of free in your mind to kind of take what the game gives you. You can't have like a predetermined course and say, okay, I'm going to go over here and
It's
get
different
this.
every time.
Yeah.
It's different every time. Things appear randomly. I remember complaining to the sound guy, the sound person on the game, that I couldn't hear, you know, this guy exploding over in the corner, Mutoid Man, and not Mutoid Man, Mr. Shrapnel. And you know, he like threw up his arms. He said, you know, are you crazy? You're throwing off 30 explosions a second. It's like, you know, how do you expect to hear Mr. Shrapnel explode when, you know, you're shooting 10 bullets a second and there's all these explosions happening and you know, there's gunfire, bah, 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 and you know, he's right. I mean, you sit back and you listen to the game. It's like, wow, it is nonstop explosions. The first boss monster we did for Smash TV was Mutoid Man. And I remember, you know, John just went into his office, and you know, he came back the next day, and he had these sketches of this guy in a tank, and actually wanted the guy floating a little bit at first. Yeah. Wanted him kind of flying around, and I was fearful of, you know, how I'd make a big thing float and fly around. So I said, well, what about tank tread, you know? Right. And so that's kind of how we got into the business with Smash TV. The interesting thing about Smash TV is that you know, it's very violent. You know, the body chunks go flying in the air. You know, the pools of blood that come out of the boss monsters. The boss monsters losing arms and screaming, and you know, of course, a couple of years after Mortal Kombat came, and there was the hoopla about violence in video games.
Actually, when we first got that going, I mean, we just watched that for days. You know, just the blood pouring out of his mouth. I mean, it was like.
Well, I remember Eugene. You know, one of the cool things about these early hardware platforms, for me, I had come from doing, you know, the Atari VCS games where the entire game was 4K. It would only take maybe 6 weeks to do these games, but very limited horsepower. And when I got to MidWay, Williams at the time, and the hardware that these guys had developed, you know, sat in my office. I mean, the number of objects I could toss out and balls bouncing around, I mean, I was just overwhelmed by it. So when it came time to turn on, you know, some body parts or some chunks, I mean, just turn on 2 of them. Well, that looks cool. Turn on 5 of them. Well, that looks cooler. I remember Eugene, the first time he saw the blood coming out of the boss monster, he said, "That's $50 a week."
My favorite gratuitous piece of violence in Smash TV is the eyeball.
Oh yeah.
When you step on that landmine, this incredibly, I mean, it's a total 3D rotation, coming in your face, animation of an eyeball.
Yeah, sometimes more than one.
Yeah, sometimes more than one. And I mean, John, I still can't believe it, but John drew that by hand, pixel by pixel, from his head. Nothing was rendered. Nothing was, and it's growing in 3D, coming at your face. I mean, it's a total 3D effect.
We're talking about doing a Smash TV sequel. I mean, you know, John came up with the idea of, okay, this game show and, you know, these people competing, and it really still applies to today's marketplace, which is competitive head-to-head activity, you know, in some kind of a creative world. You know, I would love to do another dual joystick game. You know, I mean, that would be so cool. I mean, that's a great concept. Actually, there weren't a lot of ways. You know, that was, you know, doing a wave-based game. I remember coming in and, you know, Eugene was thinking, well, I don't know, with, you know, today's marketplace, you can get away with kind of a wave-based game. In fact, we argued about the free man icon. You know, of course, the games at that time had started to transition over to buying in as you go. You know, there had been some games prior that had, you know, allowed buy-ins. Tempest, I think, maybe was the first game that allowed that. But so Eugene and I argued because he thought, wow, you know, this, you know, I don't know if you should give away a free man. I mean, you know, we're buying in, let him continue, and, you know, let him go, and which we have. So we have ended up giving away free men based on score, and you could pick up the icon. But you know, we were a little concerned about a wave-based game, and, you know, of course, boss monsters would come in, and that kind of brought it, you know, into the current day. But
yeah, it was. Yeah, I think, you know, by adapting it to a buy-in format, and there's always that chemistry between, you know, how far can you screw the player, how much can you give the player, and how much can you screw him in.
Right.
And you're trying to get money out of the player, you know, and so that there's that conflict there, and
sure.
I think so I think with the buy-in, and the other big thing was the boss monster format. So basically,
taking your money,
yeah.
There was a movie called Running Man with Arnold Schwarzenegger that must have come out around '88, something like that. That kind of formed some of the, you know, the elements of Smash TV as well. Of course, you know, we had two people out there competing just amongst themselves. It wasn't like the movie where, you know, they're prisoners and it's a death match.
Yeah, and we took it. I think we took it into the height of absurdity. You know, that was kind of the coolness of Smash TV was it took this, you know, people are like dying and killing each other, you know, for like toasters.
Right,
you know,
right. It's a futuristic game show. I mean, in fact, that says the year is 1999, right? The number one rated TV show is Smash TV.
That's right. Right. And it's like the game, you know, the game host and
he was real campy.
Yeah, yeah, just kind of like, he was kind of inspired by like some of the RoboCop stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
yeah, RoboCop was big then.
You know, and just kind of, it took this whole kind of satirical, comical edge on this whole thing.
Right.
That just,
I'd buy that for $1.
Yeah.
And stuff, right?